For years, my backyard transformed from a modest patch of grass into a true oasis, a sanctuary that reflected my personality and passion for landscaping. Each phase of its evolution was an adventure, filled with challenges and triumphs that shaped not just the space, but also my skills as a gardener. The crowning jewel was undoubtedly the custom-built patio. It was designed to be an extension of the home, with beautifully crafted stonework surrounding a fire pit where friends and family gathered on cool evenings. The koi pond, shimmering under the sunlight, served as a visual and auditory centerpiece. I can still recall the day I placed the first stone, envisioning how the gentle sound of cascading water would create a serene atmosphere. Over time, I stocked it with vibrant koi fish, each one bringing an added layer of life and color to my little piece of paradise. Surrounding this aquatic haven, I meticulously landscaped every inch, planting flowers and shrubs that bloomed in harmony through seasons, their colors weaving a tapestry that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. This labor of love was not merely about aesthetics. It became a refuge where I could unwind after long days at work. Every flower bed was carefully curated, expressing my love for nature, a reflection of who I was and what I valued. Friends often remarked that stepping into my backyard felt like entering another world, far removed from the bustle of daily life. However, this refuge soon became a battleground when the HOA deemed it insufficient according to their ever-shifting aesthetic standards. But little did they know that behind every flower and stone lay not just passion, but also knowledge derived from years spent as the chief building inspector for our town. Their demands ignited a fierce determination within me to fight back, unleashing a storm against an organization that thought they could impose their will on my creation. The tranquility of my backyard oasis shattered one bright morning when a letter from the Homeowners Association landed in my mailbox. As I unfolded the document, my heart sank. The HOA claimed that my meticulously crafted haven failed to meet their nebulous aesthetic standards, citing everything from the color of the patio stones to the placement of my beloved koi pond. Their words dripped with authority, but to me, they felt like an attack on my sanctuary. Within days, the violations began to pile up. Each notice detailed specific grievances, prohibited landscaping choices, the angle of the patio's design, even the size of the koi pond. The incessant barrage of paperwork made it clear the HOA intended to dismantle my years of hard work and passion. They demanded that I either tear down significant portions of my creation or face crippling fines amounting to thousands of dollars. The audacity was infuriating, especially since I prided myself on adhering to community guidelines while enhancing the neighborhood's overall aesthetic. It felt as though they had launched a personal vendetta against me, fueled by jealousy or an insatiable need for control over every aspect of our community. My friends and neighbors expressed their disbelief. Many couldn't understand how something so benign could provoke such harsh scrutiny. As I processed their demands, a mix of anger and determination surged within me. What these HOA members didn't realize was that I wasn't just any resident. My role as chief building inspector meant I had an intricate understanding of zoning laws and building codes. With years spent approving permits and ensuring compliance across the town, I knew their claims were not only absurd, but also deeply flawed in light of city regulations. This would not just be a fight for my backyard. It was about standing up against an organization wielding power without accountability. And so, with each violation notice sparking a fire within me, I began to strategize, readying myself not just to protect my oasis, but to expose the hypocrisy lurking behind their seemingly authoritative facade. Beneath the tranquil surface of my daily life lay an intricate web of responsibilities that shaped my professional identity. As the chief building inspector for our town, I navigated a realm filled with blueprints and regulations, spending years sifting through construction permits and zoning laws that dictated how buildings and landscapes could coexist within our community. My role demanded precision, an eye for detail, and a deep understanding of municipal codes, all of which I had honed meticulously. Every day, I interacted with homeowners, contractors, and architects, guiding them through the complex approval process while ensuring compliance with safety and planning standards. It was both a privilege and a challenge, one that often put me in the position of arbitrator in disputes between residents and the HOA. Little did my neighbors know that behind my friendly demeanor was a person who understood every nuance of the zoning laws that governed our lives. This duality in my life became even more critical when the HOA threatened my backyard oasis. With years spent approving projects across town, I possessed an insider's perspective on what was permissible and what lay beyond the bounds of compliance. The very codes they invoked to threaten my sanctuary were ones I had not only enforced, but had also shaped through my work. As violation notices stacked up on my kitchen counter, I delved deep into the layers of city regulations, familiarizing myself once more with every clause that underscored property rights and aesthetic guidelines. Each notice from the HOA served as a reminder, not just of their misguided attempts to assert control over my personal space, but also of how much power I wielded as an authority figure within our community. What they failed to realize was that this wasn't just a battle for my own backyard. It was an opportunity to leverage my position against theirs. Armed with knowledge that few possessed and backed by my career-long dedication to fairness and justice in construction governance, I was ready to shift the balance of power back into my hands. This time, instead of being merely an enforcer of their rules, I would become the architect of their downfall. As the weight of the HOA's violation notices settled heavily on my shoulders, a spark ignited within me, a determination to reverse the narrative. The idea of turning the tables took root in my mind as I recalled my extensive experience with zoning laws and building codes. If the HOA believed they could wield their authority over my backyard, then it was time to unravel their foundation and expose their hypocrisy. The thought of scrutinizing the very structures they had approved filled me with a sense of empowerment. I knew that many homeowners lived in fear of HOA sanctions, whether due to minor landscape changes or color choices. But I also knew that beneath their facade of regulation lay numerous violations lurking in plain sight, those of their own making. With renewed focus, I set out to investigate properties approved by the HOA over the years, seeking compliance issues that could challenge their integrity. Armed with my knowledge as a chief building inspector, I began scanning neighborly landscapes and architectural facades with a discerning eye. I mapped violations, fences erected too high, patios built without proper permits, and even ponds without necessary environmental assessments, all well-documented infractions against HOA regulations. During my long walks through the neighborhood, I took discreet notes, making sure to meticulously photograph evidence that highlighted discrepancies in construction standards. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, my heart raced at the thought of revealing these findings. Each violation I uncovered felt like a stepping stone toward vindication, not just for me, but for others who had faced unwarranted scrutiny from the HOA. I envisioned organizing a neighborhood meeting where I could share my discoveries and empower others to stand up against unjust fines and regulations. This was about more than just reclaiming my own sanctuary. It was about restoring balance within our community. With every illegitimate structure exposed, I would watch as the metaphorical net tightened around an organization that thrived on intimidation and confusion. The tides were turning, and soon the truth would illuminate the real governance issues plaguing our neighborhood. This time I would be the one driving change, armed with authority and knowledge they never expected to see coming. As I delved deeper into the HOA's past approvals, a shocking revelation emerged that would change the course of my battle. I stumbled upon documentation that revealed illegal renovations made by none other than the HOA president. It seemed almost poetic. The very person who had wielded their authority to impose strict standards on others was living in blatant violation of those same rules. Digging further, I discovered that the president had made significant alterations to their property without proper permits. An expansive deck that extended beyond allowable limits, a fountain that encroached on communal space, and landscaping that deviated from established guidelines. Funny how people think they can get away with nonsense when they assume you don't know your rights. Kind of like how people who subscribe to this channel always seem to catch HOA schemes before they even happen. Coincidence? Maybe, but let's get back to how I flipped the script on them. Each modification mirrored the violations I had received, illustrating a glaring double standard. The audacity was infuriating, but it also provided me with an unexpected advantage. With mounting evidence of hypocrisy in hand, I meticulously documented each infraction, compiling photographs and official records to create a comprehensive dossier. This was more than just a personal vendetta. It was about exposing a corrupt system that targeted residents while allowing its leaders to operate above the law. The more I uncovered, the more emboldened I became. This wasn't merely about protecting my backyard anymore. It was about dismantling an oppressive regime. I envisioned presenting my findings at the upcoming HOA meeting, a platform where I could lay bare their transgressions for all to see. The thought of standing before my neighbors, armed with undeniable proof of their president's wrongdoings, filled me with exhilaration. It was time to turn the tide in our favor. As I prepared for this confrontation, I reached out to fellow homeowners who had suffered under the HOA's oppressive rule. Many were eager to join me in this fight, sharing their own stories of unjust fines and grievances. Together, we formed a collective voice ready to demand accountability from those who had abused their power for too long. With our community united and equipped with evidence of wrongdoing, we were poised not just to defend our individual rights, but to challenge the very foundation of an organization that had thrived on fear and intimidation. The moment of truth was approaching, and I felt invigorated by the prospect of justice finally being served. With evidence of the HOA president's violations in hand, I knew that mere documentation wouldn't be enough to bring down their facade. It was time to devise a strategic plan to gather comprehensive evidence against the entire HOA, solidifying our case and ensuring that accountability could no longer be avoided. First, I outlined the critical elements necessary for my plan. I needed to systematically gather photographs and records of all questionable structures within the neighborhood, particularly those that had been previously approved by the HOA. I dedicated several evenings to meticulously documenting properties, focusing on anything that appeared out of compliance. Each photograph served as a crucial building block, revealing not just the violations, but also the type of enforcement disparities that had plagued our community. Simultaneously, I researched current zoning laws and regulations, scrutinizing municipal codes to understand exactly how they were applied and where they had been overlooked. As I pieced everything together, I began drafting a detailed report that outlined specific violations and discrepancies in compliance. This report would serve as a clear presentation of evidence for my impending confrontation with the HOA. Moreover, I reached out to fellow homeowners who had already shared their experiences of dealing with the HOA's unfair tactics. By collecting their stories and pairing them with visual evidence, I envisioned creating a compelling case that spotlighted not just my battle, but also the broader struggles faced by our community. Their narratives added emotional weight, reinforcing the urgency for change and accountability. I planned a series of meetings where we would come together to strategize next steps, pooling our resources and insights to form a united front. These gatherings surged with energy as shared frustrations turned into plans for action. We were all fighting for justice and fairness. Finally, once our findings were compiled into a thorough dossier complete with photographic evidence and testimonies, I could confidently approach the upcoming HOA meeting. Armed with this arsenal of data, it was time to confront the board with irrefutable proof of their failings. The stage was set for what would be an explosive showdown, a chance not only to reclaim my backyard, but to catalyze change throughout our community. The tide was turning, and soon their reign of intimidation would come to an end. As the days passed and the confrontation with the HOA drew closer, tensions began to mount not only within me but throughout the community. My neighbors, who had initially supported my efforts, started to feel the backlash from the HOA's retaliatory tactics. The board, sensing their grip on power slipping, ramped up their intimidation strategy, issuing baseless complaints against those who spoke up, threatening fines for minor infractions that had previously gone unnoticed. I could see the strain on my neighbors' faces. One evening, I met with a few of them at my home to discuss our plans. As we gathered around the dining table, the atmosphere was thick with anxiety. "What if they come after us next?" one neighbor asked, her voice trembling. It was a valid concern. The HOA had a long history of targeting dissenters, and many were rightfully afraid of retribution. Despite these fears, it became increasingly clear that our collective frustration was reaching a boiling point. We shared stories of how the HOA's arbitrary enforcement had affected our lives, from ridiculous fines for garden gnomes placed too close to sidewalks to verbal harassment during neighborhood meetings. The injustices fueled our resolve, but I worried that fear might overshadow our efforts. In those moments of doubt, I reminded everyone why we were fighting, not just for my backyard, but for fairness and transparency in our community. I encouraged them to document their experiences and continue to stand firm in their pursuit of justice. "We're stronger together," I assured them, trying to reignite the spark of determination that had initially brought us together. Yet even as we fortified our unity, I could sense an undercurrent of anxiety as HOA representatives began making surprise visits to homes throughout the neighborhood. Their presence served as a chilling reminder of their power and influence. My heart raced as I realized that my actions could have unintended consequences for those who dared to support me. Despite this rising tension and the fear it instilled in my neighbors, I remained resolute. Our upcoming confrontation at the HOA meeting would not only be a test of my strength, but also a pivotal moment for all of us. With every passing day, I felt both the weight of responsibility and an unyielding drive to see this fight through, not just for myself, but for an entire community yearning for change. As the tension reached its peak, I knew it was time to escalate our efforts against the HOA. With gathered evidence and overwhelming community support, we initiated legal action aimed at holding the HOA accountable for their consistent failures in enforcing regulations fairly. Our first step involved filing complaints that detailed numerous inconsistencies in the way they had treated different homeowners. Working closely with a lawyer experienced in property disputes, we meticulously crafted our legal documents. Each complaint highlighted specific incidents where the HOA had ignored violations committed by some residents while zealously pursuing minor grievances against others, including my own backyard oasis. The double standards were glaringly obvious. While I was facing fines and threats over my koi pond, other properties stood untouched despite clear infractions. In addition to thorough documentation of specific violations, we compiled testimonies from various residents who had faced similar retaliation. Their voices added depth to our case, showcasing a pattern of intimidation and misconduct that permeated the HOA's practices. As we filed our complaints, I felt both exhilaration and trepidation. This was uncharted territory, but it was fueled by unwavering determination. By filing these legal complaints, we effectively turned the tables on the HOA. What had once been a one-sided battle now bore testimony to a collective uprising against their oppressive tactics. The board could no longer operate in obscurity. Their actions were about to be laid bare for everyone, both within the community and beyond, to see. The ripple effect of our actions reverberated throughout the neighborhood. Residents who had previously hesitated to speak up began to rally alongside us. They shared their stories of unjust fines and bureaucratic harassment at community gatherings. The more people joined our cause, the more emboldened we became. As our legal momentum grew, so did our sense of urgency leading up to the imminent HOA meeting. We were no longer just fighting for my backyard. We were standing up for a collective vision of fairness and accountability in our community governance. The moment of reckoning approached fast, and I prepared myself for not only defending my rights, but also catalyzing real change for everyone who'd suffered under the HOA's reign of terror. As the legal battle against the HOA began to take shape, a palpable shift occurred within the community. What had started as a personal struggle for my backyard quickly transformed into a rallying cry for residents who had long felt oppressed by the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. The stories we shared became sparks that ignited a broader conversation about fairness, accountability, and the rights of homeowners. During neighborhood gatherings, whispers turned into conversations, and conversations blossomed into passionate discussions about the injustices faced at the hands of the HOA. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down began to step forward with their stories, each tale revealing another layer of discontent with the board's practices. Gardeners recounted fines for innocuous flower arrangements. Families spoke of retaliatory regulations imposed after they dared to voice their dissatisfaction, and everyone shared how terrified they had felt standing alone against an organization that wielded its power like a sword. The more I engaged with my neighbors, the clearer it became that we were not just fighting for my backyard, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by fear. As we organized meetings to strategize our next steps, I watched faces light up with newfound hope. There was strength in numbers. We began formulating plans to attend the upcoming HOA meeting not just as individuals, but as a united front. Posters went up across our neighborhood declaring our intentions. Words like fairness and transparency adorned every corner, sending a powerful message that we would not be intimidated any longer. The community came alive with energy as residents committed to attending meetings together, prepared to share their experiences and demand change. This renewed sense of unity was contagious, lifting spirits that had been dampened by years of oppressive oversight. Neighbors exchanged contact information and formed small support groups dedicated to documenting violations together. With each passing day, our collective determination grew stronger. We could see that we were no longer just victims battling an unjust regime. In this charged environment, I felt a mix of pride and responsibility. A responsibility not only to defend my own sanctuary, but also to be a voice for all those who might feel powerless against the HOA's gavel. Our movement was gaining traction, and I knew that when we stepped into that meeting room together, we would not only present evidence but also symbolize a change that reverberated through our entire community. The tide was shifting, and it was time for justice to prevail. The day of the public hearing arrived, and a palpable tension filled the air as neighbors gathered in the community center, eyes fixed on the front where HOA board members sat, exuding a mix of confidence and unease. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat resonating with the collective resolve of those who had come to witness this pivotal moment. Armed with our meticulously compiled evidence, we were ready to expose the corruption that had long plagued our community. As I approached the podium, I glanced around at familiar faces, friends and neighbors who had once felt silenced but now stood firm in solidarity. Taking a deep breath, I began my presentation, detailing how the HOA had unjustly targeted individuals while turning a blind eye to its own members' violations. The room was silent, every ear tuned to the facts being laid bare. I highlighted specific complaints from residents, seamlessly weaving their stories into my narrative. Each account echoed the same theme: intimidation tactics employed by an organization supposed to foster community harmony. With every example I presented, I could see some board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Their arrogance began to wane as I unveiled documentation of their inconsistencies, a carefully orchestrated display that showcased their hypocrisy. As I moved on to discuss the illegal renovations made by the HOA president, gasps rippled through the audience. Photographs of unauthorized constructions flashed on the screen behind me, and murmurs of disbelief circulated among my neighbors. The atmosphere shifted from tension to triumph as it became clear that we were not just fighting for my backyard, but for everyone affected by an unjust system. In that moment, empowered voices rose from the crowd to amplify my message. Fellow homeowners shared their own grievances and experiences at the mic. The camaraderie was electric, an undeniable sense of unity against a common adversary. Each testimony fortifying our case until it felt like an unassailable wave of truth crashing against the wall of deceit built by the HOA. By the end of the hearing, it was clear our message had resonated beyond mere complaints. It had struck at the heart of what was fundamentally wrong with our governance. As I stepped down from the podium, applause erupted throughout the room. A mixture of relief and excitement surged among us. It was a defining moment, a bold declaration that we would no longer be passive subjects under oppressive rule. With our evidence presented and spirits lifted, I left that hearing feeling triumphant yet aware that this was only one battle in an ongoing war for justice and reform within our community. But today marked a turning point. Today we reclaimed our voices. In the weeks that followed the public hearing, the effects of our united front began to ripple through the HOA, amplifying with each passing day. As awareness of the board's unethical practices spread throughout the community and beyond, pressure mounted from both residents and local officials. The evidence we had presented became a weapon in a growing storm, one that exposed not only their failures, but also revealed the systemic issues that had long plagued our neighborhood. Fines started accumulating against the HOA as city officials began to investigate the numerous violations we highlighted. They wrestled with mounting public outcry and intense scrutiny from various stakeholders who demanded accountability for an organization that was supposed to maintain community standards, but had instead contributed to a culture of fear and intimidation. Residents started reporting irregularities en masse. Stories that once went unheard now became pivotal elements of a larger narrative demanding change. As more complaints rolled in, it became increasingly clear that the board's days were numbered. Regular meetings turned chaotic as frustrated homeowners voiced their grievances openly, demanding action from those they had once feared. Calls for resignations echoed through the hallways of our community center, gaining momentum as neighbors rallied behind one another in solidarity. The tipping point arrived when a city council meeting was scheduled to address the multiple complaints against the HOA. With media attention focused squarely on them, board members who once wielded their power without hesitation now exhibited visible discomfort as more and more residents testified about their experiences. Under immense pressure, it was no surprise when the HOA announced they would have to disband or radically restructure in order to quell the uproar. I watched as disbelief washed over some members while relief washed over us. This moment felt monumental. The impending collapse of such a long-standing organization marked a new chapter not just for my backyard, but for every homeowner who had felt marginalized. As I reflected on this resolution while standing among my neighbors, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride and hope. This wasn't merely about winning a battle. It was about dismantling an oppressive structure and paving the way for a new beginning grounded in fairness and accountability. The fight had been hard, but today signified victory, not just for me but for an entire community that was finally reclaiming its voice and its rights. As I stood in my backyard, now a symbol of resilience and triumph, I reflected on the journey that had led us here. The disbanding of the HOA was more than just a personal victory. It represented a fundamental shift in the dynamics of our community. The oppressive shadow they had cast over homeowners had been lifted, allowing individuals to reclaim their spaces and voices. With the board gone, the local governance began to implement meaningful changes that prioritized transparency and fairness. New guidelines were established, emphasizing open communication between residents and leadership. Community meetings transformed from tense exchanges into collaborative discussions where every resident felt empowered to contribute. It was heartening to witness neighbors engaging at levels previously unseen, discussing not just property issues, but plans for neighborhood enhancement. The success of our collective efforts underscored the importance of standing united against unfair governance. I marveled at how the very act of confronting injustice had forged stronger bonds among us, turning acquaintances into friends with shared goals. Our community emerged from this struggle not just intact, but more vibrant than ever, ready to tackle challenges together. Seeing families take pride in their homes again brought me immeasurable joy. Children played freely in yards adorned with personal touches. Gardens, swings, and decorations that once would have been grounds for complaint had now become symbols of individual expression. People were no longer afraid to beautify their spaces. We were all reminded that home is a reflection of one's identity. Yet, with these personal freedoms came an unwavering responsibility to protect them. I felt a renewed commitment to maintaining individual property rights while advocating for equitable policies within our community. Legal frameworks were put in place to ensure future governance would prioritize homeowner input and protect against arbitrary enforcement. The resonance of our fight echoed beyond just our neighborhood. It became a blueprint for other communities facing similar struggles. I realized that true change requires constant vigilance and active participation. We had dismantled a system that operated with impunity and forged a new path toward responsible local governance. As I admired my transformed backyard, complete with blooming flowers and serene koi, I recognized that this space symbolized so much more than just landscaping. It represented the community's collective voice rising over adversity and the commitment to fostering a fairer environment for all residents. In achieving this victory, we not only preserved our rights but redefined what it meant to be part of a true community, one built on solidarity, accountability, and respect for every homeowner's rights. As I stood in my revitalized backyard, I took a moment to reflect on the remarkable journey that had unfolded from adversity to empowerment. What began as a battle against an overreaching HOA had transformed me from a passive victim into a passionate advocate for justice and fairness within our community. This experience had not only fortified my resolve, but also instilled a deep-seated belief in the power of collective action. Through each challenge faced, I learned that resilience is more than merely enduring hardship. It's about rising with newfound strength and purpose. Each violation, notice, and confrontation pushed me to dig deeper, unearthing not just legal precedents, but the very essence of what it means to fight for one's rights. As I engaged with fellow residents, their stories of struggle echoed my own, illuminating a shared desire for fairness and transparency that rang louder than any threats from the HOA. Empowerment came not only from the victories achieved, but also from witnessing my neighbors stand up for themselves. The bonds formed throughout this fight transformed our community, creating a sense of solidarity that had been missing before. We were no longer isolated individuals afraid to voice our concerns. We had become a united front, dedicated to confronting injustice while supporting one another. This journey has recommitted me to advocating for individual property rights while fostering an environment where every homeowner feels valued and heard. I've come to understand that local governance should serve its constituents, not intimidate them. The transformative changes we initiated will echo beyond our neighborhood. We have set a precedent for other communities grappling with similar struggles. In the aftermath of our victory, I recognize that the fight for justice requires continual vigilance, ongoing dialogue, and active participation in local governance. Our success has paved the way for new policies fostering accountability and encouragement for residents to engage in community affairs. Each blooming flower in my backyard stands as a reminder of our triumph, not just against the HOA, but over fear itself. As I care for my garden, I see it flourish in parallel with our community spirit, a testament to our growth through adversity. Together, we've created an environment where fairness reigns and every homeowner's right is celebrated. I stand committed to ensuring these values are upheld for future generations, knowing that together, we have the power to shape the narrative of our community and transform our living spaces into true reflections of who we are. This journey is a testament to resilience, a reminder that overcoming adversity can illuminate pathways toward empowerment and sustainable change.